crying out for a technological New Jerusalem, emphasis on the technological. This is my first time using spaces on x.com, and I'm not 100% sure that anything's really happening here. Also, I only invited 2 people to this, which is hopefully a couple of people will tune in. I think this will be saved, and I will be able to rip it with relative ease to put it on other platforms. I am going to talk a little bit about this most important of disciplines, using the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history, advanced computing, to build a humane and sustainable economic system of a kind perhaps different from what you might imagine when you think of state socialism, or that's to say the most fully realized communist formations that have yet to be built. And the reason that form might be different is, among others, because we have 5 years left before capitalism's climate apocalypse causes total human extinction or the death of billions, a white supremacist genocide unlike any other in that case. That is what is being done by the global north, particularly the United States, to the rest of the world. And of course, you're not going to turn into a pumpkin on 2029, if you're a global northerner, particularly. But in the decades to follow, according to every credible climate scientist, we will have reached this period of runaway overheating if we do not transform the industrial bases of this far-right neoliberal and militaristic capitalist system, of which the prime culprit is the $1 trillion a year abomination, the United States military-industrial complex, the world's worst polluter, whose only real job on the world stage is protecting other super polluters, creating a global regime of super pollution. This is an omnicidal force unlike any other in history, the fascist United States, particularly its military-industrial complex. So the problems of the omnicide are not down to bad vibes, not whether you are loving nature in the way that you should, although that's, of course, a thing that you might do well to do. But the problem, of course, is these industrial bases. And we can basically describe 3 of them as the worst culprits. The military-industrial complexes of the fascist West, particularly that of the fascist United States, as I already described. And then, of course, is fossil fuels generally. There's some overlap there. But because that effect of fossil fuels generally is so vast, and because it's an essential component of this main driver of the omnicide, the fascist U.S. military-industrial complex, we would say that fossil fuels are a very, very big culprit, even though the third culprit by some studies is 51% of the effects of the capitalist climate apocalypse, and that is livestock systems, factory farms, providing a luxury product to global northerners. That's you. You're sitting in an SUV like a piece of shit, eating a cheeseburger like an even bigger piece of shit right now. I guarantee you, most of the people who are calling themselves socialists or communists or hardline anarchists are still living the capitalistic consumeristic lifestyle, still a part of the problem. And it's true that we need to organize a resistance to destroy these offending sectors, these industrial bases. But you can't really do that well if you're not willing to make some small changes to your life, right? I'm not going to be convinced that you are a soldier in the war to stop the omnicide and that you would say be willing to do anything to that end. If you're not able to say change your lifestyle a little bit, stop driving around in an SUV eating a fucking cheeseburger like every other WASP piece of shit. And that's, you know, I have had this argument with many scientific communists, people presenting themselves as scientific communists, who somehow see it as appropriate to defend this highly capitalistic sector of livestock systems, of luxury products. They say, I don't like plant-based diet. I don't like veganism. I don't think that that's something you need to talk about as a scientific communist. Well, you're a crypto-fascist, right? If that's your approach. Because we have 5 years to do these things, and you're at best morally compromised, a person who you would not want to be in that foxhole with as a comrade, if that's their response to that. But that is still third on the list, in my view. And just as you can have an ordering of importance of those three things, you absolutely must have an ordering of importance of taking this approach of militantly combating the forces of the omnicide. Most of what is said and done in these areas is more in the area of greenwashing. That's to say, well, you know, I've been recycling for 30 years, so what's the problem? Well, that has almost no impact on the transformation of these industrial bases. That's what's the problem. And we have 5 years left to do something a good deal more difficult than your performative bullshit. And so when a person says they're willing to fight for that, and, you know, oh, I haven't, you know, if they say privately, not on a public forum, but if they say privately, oh, I haven't been in a position to completely stop eating the cheeseburgers from McDonald's, you know, I'm working all the time and I'm grabbing cheeseburgers from McDonald's. You know, I'm not too impressed by that confession. They're not saying it publicly, I assume, because that would be something that a fascist would do. But you have to think of this in terms of actually building movements and affinity groups. You know, a big way to see if a person would be serious about this is to ask them what they thought of the Animal Liberation Front folks that emerged in the 90s and 2000s. By the 2000s, the overwhelming fascist, compromised, for-profit mainstream media of the United States response to ELF folks was that they are eco-terrorists, right? When in point of fact, these are people who are fighting eco-terrorists, right? The eco-terrorists are the for-profit concerns that are killing the planet. Those are eco-terrorists. There are no other eco-fascists of any significance in this world other than capitalists, people working for corporations that are killing the planet, or other concerns, military fascist concerns. There's no one else who's an eco-fascist other than the actual fucking fascists. And I hear scientific communists, putatively folks who are scientific communists, saying this all the time, they're just eco-fascists, you're an eco-fascist. Hey, fuck you, you know. This mostly, most of these people have read a book a few times. They've read some works of Marx and Engels. They've read maybe some works of Lenin and Stalin. They're not living in the 21st century, however. They're not recognizing that something like advanced computing would be the most powerful tool and for transforming a society already, arguably, but certainly the most powerful revolutionary weapon in history. And they are absolutely not going to really be a part of any kind of movement. You know, this is just an aesthetic, right? I'm wearing a red T-shirt and a Ushanka, and I'm yelling at people for not being for not yelling at people for not being precisely the kind of ideologue that I would like them to be. That's these people are worthless, right? There's no one really more useless than the Marxists that you'll meet on websites like this, except for everybody else, right? Except for everyone else who is more capitalistic than them. But you have to think of this sort of thing in terms of, in my view, organizing a mass movement as much as possible. But in that time frame, who is more effective in that 5-year time frame before the ticking clock runs out? The left folks who at their height were every 3 weeks destroying $1 million worth of capitalist infrastructure before they were neutralized. That is, mostly neutralized. Or people who have a 75-year plan for building state socialism in their country. Who is the more effective person in that 5-year time frame? I say that as a scientific communist. We don't have a lot of options. And so that's why I focused on writing about cybernetic communism, because even right now, with the state of the art in computer science, which is overwhelmingly, but not exclusively, fascist controlled. So there are such things as open source technology, and there are even such things as open source advanced computing usages of kinds that are of real interest, like open source large language models, which can be arrayed into by the downloading of open source large language models to individual users' computers, or by a slightly more complex method of using virtual GPUs. Individual users can build something that would be the core of a workforce multiplier in the form of these increasingly agentic digital assistants by the standard of the present moment, and looking at the one that people would be most familiar with of things that are somewhat open source, not unfortunately fully open source, but this is a point of reference, is Llama 3.2. And that is not an automaton. That is not something that is able to have the agency of a human being. But it is agentic enough to be steered by human beings in this array to build a workforce multiplier. So you can be on the network with your GPU machine, and if there's a few thousand or 10,000 or 30,000 people operating by what I call the Sleeping Beauty principle, where they don't have to be awake for their GPU to be running. They don't have to be awake for their digital assistant effectively to be doing high-level work. And so this mass of AI agents can be doing things like working to put pressure on the fascist United States to transform these bases. The things that ELF could be doing in that context. Get creative. So a person merely working to make sure that those AI agents don't AI hallucinate or go off the rails or just start doing things of no use. So about 1 hour a week relative to, say, potentially what would really be hundreds of man hours for each individual GPU, even though they're not running for hundreds of hours a week. But because the definition of a man hour is rather transformed by what an AI agent is able to do when thus arrayed. So this is a method wherein if millions of people begin to work in this way, we have something that I would say is handily powerful enough to stop capitalism's climate apocalypse, which is a complex process of transforming those industrial bases and doing things that people like Sam Altman or Elon Musk would absolutely tell you not to do. But those people are not real technologists. They are not real cyberneticists or futurists. These are CIA assets pretending to be interested in technology. That's almost every technologist that you've ever heard of. Well, I guess I'll talk a little bit about this. I'll link in when this gets posted to some other talks that are a little more technical on the subject. But the basic idea here is that we can build something in contrast to the Altman or Musk bourgeois superintelligence, which is no superintelligence at all. Google, not merely a CIA asset like Elon Musk, but an arm of the military-industrial complex, is, and Musk's operations have those features, of course, too. It says that they are building a bourgeois, everything is in parentheses, bourgeois superintelligence. But this thing that is part of the military-industrial complex that's killing the planet, whatever superpowers it is imbued with, it could not possibly be described as superintelligence, right? The definition of intelligence, in my view, would be a creature that is capable of not killing itself and its species, right? So humans steering a bourgeois superintelligence, that is no superintelligence, my friends. That is artificial super stupidity. That is a superpowered, doomed hyper-capitalist phenomena. There is no accelerationism. There is only accelerating human extinction. The closest thing that you would describe as accelerationism in this world is what I have said: a mass movement to build cybernetic communism. Everything else would be things dramatically more part of the problem than a part of the solution. And so we can build this thing, a people's superintelligence, which is often the term that I use to describe this, although I've also used other terms, mostly that high automation, open source, large language model workgroup term, which is a little more perhaps to the point than people's superintelligence. The people's superintelligence, if you say that, it very much sounds like you're describing something from a comic book. But the other thing actually describes what it is that would be done. This, I looked at, for a second, the outline of a guy. You should never watch this guy. His name's David Shapiro. He has some maybe 100,000 followers or something on YouTube. I know he doesn't have that many followers, but he gets a lot of views on his videos. He's kind of one at the periphery of these intellectual dark web streamer rats. He's somebody who would be friends with the Weinsteins, but not at the level of like a Joe Rogan operator, right? But still, it's the only way that a person with a couple thousand followers gets millions and millions of views. it's because they met Weinstein and was like, yeah, I'll be a neoliberal, neoconservative piece of shit. I'll do whatever you need, man. That's basically, in a little bit reductive form, the resume of most of these Rogan type people, Lex Fridman type people, most of the streamers who are famous. And Shapiro isn't that famous because he talks about advanced computing and things to do with AI takeoff almost exclusively, which is not something that's going to turn you into a household name like just being a buffoon like Rogan. And so talks more and more about what the economic system in this bourgeois AI takeoff is supposedly going to be like. So the implication here, and this is something that I've gotten from people who are often describing themselves as anarchists or even anarcho-capitalists, the implication here is of what Shapiro or people like this are often saying in these contexts, is that there's this kind of sort of sleeper agent in play. Let's say that sleeper agent's name is Peter Thiel. And Peter Thiel seems like he's the world's worst techno-fascist and a racist apartheid piece of shit, trying to turn the United States into an apartheid piece of shit, turning Israel and Palestine into even worse apartheid forms, doing the worst things you could possibly imagine everywhere. This is a person who installed a fascist president of the United States twice. And when the Democrats in 2020 were rounding the corner to having a social democrat being their nominee, he just walked into a room with Obama and other people and said, if this person is the nominee, I'm going to destroy your party. And so suddenly these all these other candidates unified to stop Bernie, and he didn't give a shit. He's not actually a socialist. The most evil human being you've ever heard of, just like is somehow going to be better than every other marginally bad or really bad bourgeois institution or formation in history, none of which have proved to be communist sleeper agents, right? Every bourgeois piece of garbage in history was what it seemed to be, a bourgeois piece of garbage. But this one guy, this one phenomena of tech accelerationism is going to break the mold and build this thing that ends financial capital and empire and builds a livable world. It's a lie. It's financial empire and capital scamming everyone. And I wouldn't say David Shapiro is the architect of that scam, but he is a person who is pretty open about being neoconservative, neoliberal type person, but also often talking about this AI takeoff effect as it relates to economics. There's very few people, even people very, very learned in scientific communism, people who are serious scientific communist comrades, organizers, etc. Very few people recognize that this most powerful revolutionary weapon in history, advanced computing, things like open source LLMs and so-called AI of other related disciplines, they don't see that as important to what they're doing. And they're not absolutely wrong. History has turned on a dime before. Months happening in days, as Comrade Lenin said. And we are at that point in history where a global anti-fascist, anti-omnicidal movement could easily emerge that will not emerge without people very much like the scientific communist organizers that I described. But if you don't already have millions of people ready to do that, and you know that this other thing is going to happen in 5 years where all of this will have been for naught, that's to say all of human affairs will have been as if it had never occurred after 2029, when human extinction is a certainty. So if you don't have that ace in the hole of already having millions of people ready to do that, and I don't think anybody does because I would kind of know about it, then you might take the approach of doing this thing that would allow 50,000 people instead of 500 million people to have a comparable effect, namely this workforce multiplier that I've described, the people's superintelligence. And Shapiro is, you know, um, his idea of he describes this as post-labor economics, which that if that's the title of what you're saying, even if it's in the context of an AI takeoff, I mean, you're obviously not a person who actually cares about human beings, right? Cares about building another capitalistic system, because there is no post-labor economics. There might be some marginal post-scarcity effect where people are doing what I said in the context of, say, the people's superintelligence and only required to work an hour a day or something and still receiving the necessaries and remunerations of life. That could happen in 30 years' time. But there is not a world without human beings. Thusly, there is not a world without human toil. And this person is regarded as a sort of a serious thinker among techno-futurists, which is not saying much because techno-futurists are people overwhelmingly in the West handicapped by their allegiance to far-right neoliberalism and empire. They're not intellectuals. They're professional managerial class goons. Name an AI personality or a technologist or a so-called a futurist organizer, and there's relatively fewer of those. But I know some of them, they're horrible people. And you will not be talking about a person who is actually going to contribute to building a humane and sustainable economic system. You are talking about a person who is just selling trickle-down economics with a little bit of science fiction bullshit thrown in, and somehow that is passed off as being well, I'm going to bring this to an end and see if I can rip this because nobody is in this right now, and that's okay. But I'll try it again. I'm basically trying this spaces thing because even though Twitter has gotten worse since being hostily acquired by an even worse fascist than the people who generally were steering that thing before, Elon Musk. It's this site is barely working compared to what it was a few years ago, and it's just this is a feature of this person conspiring to install a techno-fascist. Donald Trump is a techno-fascist. He's not really, a populist. He doesn't really want to be that. He's no different. He just works for Peter Thiel. All of these people just work for CIA villain type people. So, that's, why would you have this person who's famous, a greenwasher, if you're being honest, but a person who's famous for this green business, going on stage and hugging the new president, who's the world's most notorious climate denier, right? If those were people were really who they say they were, they would be mortal enemies, right? But they're all just CIA assets, right? They're all just fascist operatives. That's why Obama is catching flack from left liberal pundits saying, Obama, you insulted people, you diminished their interest in fighting. You're insulting people and diminishing their heartfelt and correct impulse to fight for Palestinian lives. You're coming on the campaign trail and telling black men that they're a problem when obviously the this white supremacist system that Obama represents as a neoconservative and neoliberal person who pretended to be doing things like socialistic things or making some move towards a more liberated new Africa. No, of course, the opposite was done. So this person who's never also just always been this CIA mega asset like Musk and Trump is he must be so embarrassed right now because he's getting flack from these left liberals. He's not fucking embarrassed. You can't embarrass a CIA asset. They're just they already know that they're human garbage. They get an email and tells them what to do, and that's what they do. They know they're on the wrong side of history. They know that they're killing the planet and that there's no force that's emerged that's in a position to stop them from doing that. And when all is said and done, they will be remembered as the worst human beings that have ever lived, which is really true of every European descended pig in the United States, right? Because you're upholding, you say, oh man, I'm a European descended person and I don't think of myself as a fascist pig. Well, I can't speak to that, but I do know that if there were any number of not fascist pigs in the United States, if there are any number of them at all, they would be organizing to stop the U.S. enforced capitalist climate apocalypse before it kills humankind, right? That's something that real human beings would tend to do, is try to fight to avoid the extinction of their species. But that's not what fascists do. Fascists help to destroy the species and say that they're going to do the right thing, say that they have a plan. David Shapiro has a plan. It's not a real plan. It's not. The real plan is ending private wealth, ending the ravages of empire and financial capital that derive specifically from private wealth. The primary contradiction, the source of elitism and cruelty and chaos in this world is private wealth. And if a person says that they want to help, but they are not saying that, then no, indeed, they do not want to help. They're just, they're engaging. They are also, David Shapiro seems like a pretty intelligent guy. It seems like there's something going on upstairs there, but that is super stupidity also, right? It's a complex sort of thing that's going on, but it's so handicapped by bourgeois ideological filth as to be effectively worthless. If you have watched a David Shapiro show and you thought, oh, well, this has helped me helped me on the path to becoming a cyber communist. Okay, is that a thing? How many people helping on the path to become cyber communists? How long, if there were suddenly thousands more David Shapiros helping on the path, would that change things in the 5-year time frame? No, that's quite intentionally what U.S. new media and old media do is greenwash and lie about the necessity to actually end financial capital. And so do not subscribe to David Shapiro. Do not. I frequently, when I do these lectures, give links to audiobooks, and I'll link to a long list of serious audiobooks from serious thinkers, liberation and revolutionary-minded thinkers. And the first on the top of that list is the one that I almost always recommend on almost every show is Endless Holocausts, which describes the fascist U.S. killing 300 million people in genocides and anti-communist wars and wars of theft. Many of them in specifically fascist wars, anti-communist wars. Anti-communism, anti-communism and fascism are the exact same thing. If you don't think of yourself as a fascist, but you push back at the idea of people organizing and fighting for a humane and sustainable economic system, which is all a communist is. If you have a problem with communism, that's because you're a fascist sympathizer. It's because you have allowed mainstream media and other garbage to implant such an amount of bourgeois ideological filth in your mind that you are worse than useless in this 5-year time frame, right? You know, if you can't become a cyber communist, knowing everything I've just said, if you still say, oh, I can't do that, you know, just fucking kill yourself, right? Oh, but I have a kid. Oh, yeah, you're killing your kid. Just fucking kill yourself. Let your kid fend for themselves, you know? But that's almost every... So when you say, oh, I'm not a European-descended fascist pig, okay, prove it. Where's a million people bivouacked outside of the Pentagon with AR-15s in hand? There's a million people, a million white people. Some of them are really fat, and maybe they're not going to be bivouacked anywhere. But there's still a million European-descended people with AR-15s who could do that. But they're not doing that because they're almost all fascists. When you see something like an actual fight on the part of European-descended people to stop this system, which represents their interests, so of course they're tending to not do that. It sort of represents their interests, right? The lack of a public health service in the United States will kill in 2025 by one measure about 100,000 people, by another measure about 200,000 people. But those numbers skew very much toward killing new Africans and Turtle Islanders and Chicano people. So they're willing to sacrifice some of their fellow European-descended fascist pigs on this altar of neoliberalism because it's killing their real enemy, brown-skinned folks, in much greater number. So if you're upholding the U.S. system, that's who you are. You know, irrespective, I have a T-shirt that has a picture of Malcolm X on it, and I go to church every Sunday. Okay. But you're upholding the system, though, right? You like Malcolm X, but you're upholding the system, right? You just voted. You just voted for one fascist over the person you think is the worst fascist. You know, that's most of the people. Not doing what would need to be done to actually not be a part of the problem. And if you say this of a new African or anyone else, understand if there's a problem with what the new African has done, the problem of the European is much, much worse because it's their fucking system that's killing the planet. I will also link to a conversation of a little more complexity. As I said, a few links. The one link will then link to some other links that drill down a little more on the people's superintelligence. I'm going to end this now. Thank you.